Thank you so much for joining another episode of Final Cut Pro Help Live. My name is Jared Ewing. I have two topics I want to talk about today because I got some questions related to these things. The first thing I'm going to talk about is how to add keyframes to a clip to move it around on the screen. And then the second thing I wanted to talk about is how to use an adjustment layer to create a transition. So let's dive into it. The first thing is I have this clip on the timeline, and it was this helicopter here. You can see it's just flying in up here. It flies in and drops some water on a wildfire that was happening. And we have a little countdown in the corner, counting down from about 20 seconds down to 0 when the helicopter is actually dropping the water back there. And what I want to do is I want this text to remain in the corner for the majority of this clip, but then near the end, maybe the last 5 seconds or so, I want the clock to get much bigger and grow over time. Now with keyframes, you can do this on any clip, and you can do this on any parameter as well, as long as when you're looking in the inspector in the top right here, that parameter has this diamond button in it. If it's got this little diamond, you can see a little plus shows up. That means we're adding a keyframe to whatever parameter is to the left here of that parameter there. So in this case, if we want the clock in the corner to grow over time, basically to get much bigger at the end here, we need two keyframes. We need one keyframe to tell it to be small, and then we need a second keyframe to tell it to be bigger at a certain spot. So with the clip selected, in this case this text clip, I'm going to go into the inspector over here, and I'm going to activate the second inspector. This is actually for your video clip here. And under this inspector, I'm going to change the scale. Okay. Now, right now, the scale is at 100%, but you can see if I increase the scale, we can have that number grow to be bigger. Now, if I just increase it, that increases it for the entire length of that countdown, which I don't want. So I'm going to do Command Z to undo that step. It resets it back to 100%. And then I'm going to move this to right around where it gets to 5. Because when it says 5, I still want it to be down here in the corner at this size. So what I'm going to do is go over to the scale, add 100%, and add a keyframe. Now if we play this, there's still no change, but what we've said is at 5 seconds, when this counter's at 5, make sure the scale is at 100%. So that's step 1, is create a keyframe at the size and time. And then the second step is to move the playhead down, and maybe after about 2 seconds, we want it to be much larger. So I've moved the playhead, and now I'm going to increase the scale. Notice on the right here for the scale all parameter, this diamond still has a plus in it, and there's been no keyframe added. So that's okay, because as you start to increase this scale, we'll get that diamond, and now notice there's a diamond over here letting us know the keyframe was added. So that's all you have to do, because now if I scroll back and play this, I'll hit the space bar, you can see we get 10, 9, 8, and then at 5, it's still small, but it starts to grow to that larger size there. Okay, so we added 2 keyframes to allow this to grow. Now, in addition to this growing over time, I also want the number to move into the center. So to do that, we're going to change the position, and we want to do the same thing. We want to add keyframes to the position. So you're going to keep an eye on a couple things here while I do this. Notice where the playhead is in time on your timeline down here, and what we're adjusting over here. Now, you may have noticed under Scale All, or to the right of this Scale All parameter, we now have this icon. It's got this little arrow kind of pointing to the left. You might also see one pointing to the right, and that allows you to navigate between those keyframes. So I'm going to click on this to go back to the ending keyframe, which is right here where it's down in the corner here. I can see that gold, all these gold diamonds light up. I'm going to click it again to move to the first keyframe. Okay, because I know when this keyframe is set at 100%, this position for X and Y is accurate. So I'm going to hit Add Keyframe because I like the position there. Then I'm going to use this Navigate Keyframe button to go to the next keyframe, and now I can change this position and put the text wherever I want, right? You can also go down to the lower left corner of the viewer, activate the transform tool, and then just visually move it around here in the viewer. Just note that if you do move around with the transform tool, it may add additional keyframes. You can see it added one for rotation and anchor point. So, this may be a little unnecessary for adding all those keyframes, but if you added a keyframe and you didn't mean to do it, you can always hit the little minus button that shows up inside a keyframe after it's been added. So maybe I remove the rotation and anchor keyframes there. And that's it. I'll click on the done button at the top right, scrub back a little bit here, hit the space bar to play this. Notice our countdown in the lower left corner there, going 8, 7, it's gonna get to 5. It starts to grow and moves into the center. And that's really all there is to that with those keyframes. Now, it can get really confusing adding keyframes and understanding where all these things are in time, and it does take some time to get used to. One tool that is built into Final Cut to help you with this keyframe navigation is the video animation that you can show in the timeline. So with a clip selected, you can either right-click on that clip or control-click if you don't have a right-click, and there's an option that says Show Video Animation. You can also do it with Control-V. And when you do Control-V, it brings up this pretty large bar here above the video, and this is what's called the video animation, and its purpose is to show keyframes in time a little bit better than you can see in the inspector. So notice here on this video animation, I can see there's keyframes here for my transform position. So for the transform parameter and how it's changing, we can see that right here on the timeline. And if I looked at this and I play this back and I say, oh, it changes at 5 seconds and it starts to grow into the center and then it stops. Well, maybe you just want it to continuously grow over time. You can just click and drag these keyframes, the ending one to the right and the one on the left will go further left. And now if I play it back, what you're gonna see is this animation we created with the transform and its scaling, it now starts earlier in the countdown and it's much slower in growing over time. Right, and you can do the same thing, or the opposite really, but doing the same thing if you move these keyframes closer together. So if you wanted it right at the end to really quickly zoom up, we can move those nice and close. And now notice the countdown stays in the corner for a while, and then when we get to the end, it all of a sudden really quickly grows up to 0. Okay, so that's how you can use keyframes to manipulate parameters. In this case, we did it with the scale and position parameters on a transform control, but any of these parameters that you see the diamond next to, that means you can add keyframes to those parameters. So if you're thinking like, hey, maybe I want to crop something or I want to change something else over time, if you see that diamond, you can add a keyframe to those parameters. So something that's kind of cool with that is if we go back in here to our countdown and we go to the generator tab, you can see there's a color parameter here, and you can actually keyframe the color. Okay, so as it gets further down, as the countdown goes down, maybe you want it to change from this white color and you wanted it to get more red over time. Maybe we're getting towards that alert stage. So you can do that. You can add a keyframe, which adds it at this time. Right now it's 7 seconds. And then we'll go to the end, and maybe we want it to be red at that point. So I'll go and choose a red color. All right. And just like that now, you can see it starts out white for the countdown, and then it changes. It doesn't just immediately change to red. It's slowly becoming more and more red over time until we get to the end. And you could repeat the same steps. If I do that again, maybe you want to go and instead of it just going right to red, maybe I want it to start out at white to about 10 seconds, and then maybe it goes to yellow. So I can add a keyframe at white. There, and then in the middle here, we'll choose around 5 seconds is when it'll be super yellow, lemon yellow, and then it'll change to red at the end here. Now, you're going to see something happens. Notice white, it goes to yellow, and then something weird happens where it goes back to white, and then it goes into red. And we can see because of the video animation on the timeline here, we have this additional keyframe that we don't need. So you can right-click or control-click on the keyframe and hit delete keyframe to remove that one out of there. Now we have it going from white text to yellow, and then at that point from yellow, it's animating over to red. Okay, so that's some keyframe stuff there, and keyframing and adding keyframes and this whole process is one of the most confusing things for people, and I would say it's something I get almost the most questions in about because it is a little tricky there. So don't hesitate to experiment with those things. One way you can avoid kind of problems with this is you can hold Option on your keyboard and drag your clip that you're manipulating up on the timeline to make a copy of it. That way you have both versions just in case. You can also use a feature called auditioning. So you can right click on your countdown that's here with it selected and put it into an audition. Actually, I always do that every time the audition feature is mentioned. But you just go up onto your menu bar here, and we're gonna put it into an audition. So where did they move this? If you ever lose something, just use the help menu. All right, under clip, audition, and there's the option there. You can say duplicate, and really you just want to duplicate it as audition. Okay, so now I have another version of this. So if I hit Control V, I activate my video animation, and then maybe I want to get rid of this color change and all these different keyframes here. I can just delete all those. Now the countdown's just big and red the entire time. And maybe they want to try that version. They decide they don't like it. Hit the little audition button in the top left corner of the clip, and you can switch back to your previous version that it still includes the countdown. Okay, so use auditions if you're unsure of a feature. That way you can keep your original version and try out something different. So hopefully that answers that question. If you do have your own questions, go ahead and pop them down into the chat there. I'd be happy to answer anything that you've got coming in. Now, the other feature that I wanted to show today is how to use an adjustment layer to create a transition. Okay. Now, Final Cut Pro 10 here does not have a adjustment layer built into it. So that's okay. If you need an adjustment layer, you can go onto the website and awesomeguide.com. That's our website. And on anawesomeguide.com, click on the Downloads tab, and you're going to see the option to download an adjustment layer right on there. So you can just click here to download that adjustment layer. And the adjustment layer is used to adjust anything that's below the clip. Okay, so it can be a little confusing working with an adjustment layer just because they are not they're not super intuitive. It's probably the easiest or the nicest way to explain it. So here I've downloaded the adjustment layer template, which is in these various folders here, and we need to take this first folder and put it into what's called the motion templates folder. And this adjustment layer is a title. So just drag that at Final Cut Pro help folder into the titles category in your motion templates. And then inside of Final Cut, notice here we get the at Final Cut Pro help category, and clicking on that displays the adjustment layer. So there's our adjustment layer, and we're going to use this. And the way that this is used is simply by dragging it down onto your timeline. That's all you have to do, and now you can apply any effects, filters, or other things to that adjustment layer, and it'll impact what's below it. Now what I want to do is I want to actually create a transition between multiple clips using the adjustment layer. So this is one way that you can use the adjustment layer. So we need 2 clips on the timeline. So I'm going to use Command minus to zoom out a little bit on my timeline here, give some space for a clip that we're going to add. And I'm just going to go up into my timeline here, and let's grab another clip that we can transition to. I do want it to be a video clip. So let's get some fireworks here. How about that? To select it, drag it down on the timeline, and there we have 2 clips. I'll do Shift Z to fit this into the viewer here. And then to create and use the adjustment layer as a transition, just click and drag this down onto the timeline above your clip here. And there's our adjustment layer. If you want, you can hide the browser, which I'm going to do in this case, and I'm going to use Command plus a couple times here to zoom in to where this transition point is. Now, right now, if I play this, I can see there's no change. It just cuts still from one clip to the next, okay? So I want the transition to be kind of quick, so I'm going to shorten my adjustment layer template here just around that section. And then I'm going to add some keyframes and behaviors to this adjustment layer. So one thing that I want to do is I want it kind of to zoom up and then out as this transition's over. That's what the person was trying to create. So what I can do is actually on the adjustment layer, just like we were seeing a second ago with the other clip, we can go into the video section and I can actually scale this up. And notice as I'm adjusting the scale for the adjustment layer, it's actually scaling up the clip below it. And it does the same thing with the fireworks clip there. Okay, so I want that to happen as it's transitioning. I kind of want it to scale up really quickly with the clip and then zoom out so that we see the full fireworks clip. So to do that, I'm going to use the same keyframes that I did earlier. So I'm going to go a little bit earlier in this adjustment layer clip with the playhead. I'm going to add a keyframe to the scale parameter. I'm going to go to the end of the transition and add another keyframe to the position here with this scale parameter. And if I do Control V, just so you can see the video animation on this adjustment layer, notice I have a keyframe at the beginning here and then one at the end. Still no change, but the reason I added those two keyframes is so that we get back to this 100%. And now in the middle here of this transition, this is where I'm going to scale it up. So it kind of zooms in to the middle of this clip. And maybe we'll go up to like 200% there. And you can either drag it, you can always like double click here too and type in a number if you know you want something very specific. Okay, and that's how we use an adjustment layer to start creating a transition. So you can see right now it kind of zooms in and then zooms out. It's not the nicest transition, so maybe we want to add some additional effects to this. We can continue to use the same adjustment layer, or you can always go and add additional adjustment layers for each effect that you create. But I'm going to go in the effects browser, and I'm going to start looking for additional effects to apply to this adjustment layer. So maybe I want to get a blur, and I like to use the Gaussian Blur, just kind of a very standard blur here, and I'll drag that onto the adjustment layer. And now notice we have a blur. The whole clip gets blurred, but just like the scale, I'm going to add some keyframes in my inspector here to this Gaussian blur, and I'm going to do it with the amount. So right now I'm in the middle keyframe, and the amount's about 50%. That's fine. I'll add a keyframe there, and I'm going to navigate back to the previous keyframe, change this down to 0 for the amounts. That way there's no blur. Notice here we're starting out with no blur. It gets really blurry and zooms in. And then at the end here, we need that blur to go away. So now I'm going to add another keyframe at the end here, bring it back down to 0. All right, so let's play that back. Zooms in and blurs out, and even that's kind of a nice transition. It just goes blurry and then comes out. It's still a little bit jarring with that cut that's in there, but it should be fine. All right, and then if we want to continue this, maybe we want to affect the colors as well. We can go into our effects and start adding some additional effects to it. You can also go up here to the top and do a search through all effects at the bottom if you want to. So I know there's one called bloom that's in one of these categories here. I can start typing in bloom and see this clip here. We can't see a preview because the adjustment layer is selected, but we can just drag that onto the clip here to apply it. And notice, especially with all these like warmer colors here, it's making it very orange. So I want to add that as well. Now, just like we did with the other parameters, I don't want this to be static the whole time. I do want to animate the amount. So under bloom, I'm going to add a keyframe for the amount. So right now it's set to about 9 there, and then I'll go back to the beginning, change this amount to 0, go back to the end here, do the same thing, change this amount to 0. Notice I don't have to click the add keyframe button after I've added the first one. Final Cut knows to automatically add that keyframe for you. So you can kind of do these steps in various orders, and Final Cut will try its best to accommodate you. So notice here, the clip is normal, and then as we start to zoom in and blur out, the color also goes a little bit wonky there. And at any time, you can uncheck the effect here in the inspector to see what it would look like before or after. If you want to change something about the effect, again, make sure you're on the keyframe to make the adjustment. So this blur is pretty strong. So I'm going to use the navigate button over here. I'm going to click on the right navigation to navigate to the middle keyframe. And maybe I'm going to take the amount down. Maybe I want just a subtle blur, not a full-on out of focus blur. I'll hit the spacebar again to preview that, see what that looks like. All right. So that looks pretty good, and I'm kind of happy with that effect. You can continue to add more and more effects to this transition as you want to make additional changes to it and adjust those keyframes, the position, and all of that. So if right now I look at this transition and it's kind of slow, maybe I want it to be a much quicker transition because you're editing to music, you can use this video animation section and just click and drag these keyframes closer together, like we saw a couple minutes ago. And now this transition is going to happen much quicker. Hit the space bar, and I can see it's a much quicker transition in and out. You can still go onto the timeline and add most of your standard transitions. So I can do Command-T here to add the default cross dissolve. And if I play this back, then we can see that's in there as well. And change the adjustment for that. So if you thought the cut was too strong, feel free to go and add another transition down here. Cool. Otherwise, that's all there is to it, and using the adjustment layer to create a quick transition. This is a clip, standard clip, so you can use Command-C and Command-V to paste this somewhere else in your project. If you had additional clips, you can go and just drag that onto those clips, and then when you play it back over those clips, you'll see that same transition happen. If you want to copy this transition or this adjustment layer to other projects that are in maybe a different library, you can do that as well. Just right click or control click on this clip and click new compound clip. You can also use Option G as the shortcut here. Name this compound clip here. So maybe this is my bloom transition, or let's say bloom zoom transition. These names are important because you're going to see those all over the place, so make sure you keep organized. And then click on OK. And now what's happened, if you right-click on this clip and choose Reveal in Browser, you'll see this clip is a clip, just like anything else, in your browser here for this event. And this clip then could be copied and pasted to other projects and events and libraries anywhere else that you have it. There's another video on this channel of how to create a template library. You could create a template library using these as well, and then you'll be able to reuse them. One thing about using this compound clip, though, notice if I play back this clip, we don't see any zoom happening. So you can't just drop the compound clip down and expect it to work. You do need to break this up and into its various components. So make sure you do that before using it. You don't have to do anything else with this, but the easiest way to break it up is select the clip, go up to the clip menu here, and there's an option that says break apart clip items. That adjustment layer is that item basically it's in there. Shift Command G, you can use the shortcut there too. And by breaking it apart, it essentially removes the use of that compound clip, and now you can see that zoom effect happening. Okay, so I hope that answers those two questions that I got and kind of helps clarify some things there. And I did get one comment as far as working with keyframes, that they made an adjustment to the keyframe and or the clip, and it just adjusted and changed the entire clip. One just note here, when you are working with keyframes, it's extremely important that you are actually changing a keyframe. If you look at your inspector and you're trying to change one of these parameters, let's go back to our just our transform parameter here as an example. Say you're trying to change this scale. If we were to change it right now, notice on the right side here, there's no filled in keyframe button here. There's no gold or yellow diamond on the right here. That means if we make a change, it's adding an additional keyframe and you're not modifying one of the current keyframes, so you're not just making an adjustment, you're adding an entirely new keyframe here, which is going to make a new animation. And if I go and make a change here, maybe I make this a lot larger just so we can see a change here. Notice it added another keyframe. That's why all these went gold, and to the scale parameter. So if I play this back now, that kind of zoom does another weird adjustment to it. And you can see over here on the right side as I skim across this, notice how this adjusts the scale all over the place. So just keep that in mind, is you want to make sure you're on a keyframe when you make the adjustment. And you can use these two arrows here to navigate between keyframes so that you are definitely on one of the keyframes here. You can also, just to make it clearer, like I said earlier, using the video animation with your clip selected, use Control V to bring up the video animation. If this is too small, which I would say it's very small right now, use Command plus to zoom in, or Command equals sign on your keyboard there to zoom into it. You can also hit the Z key to bring up your zoom tool and then hit A to go back. But this video animation will show you where your keyframes are. So notice here, I can very easily see my issue because it's clear that I wanted these three keyframes, a start, a middle, and an end. And there's this random one that got added here that's the problem. So you can use this to clean things up and to see where your animation is. For example, we can click on this keyframe, adjust its position in time. And then if we didn't want this one, we can click on it or right click on it and delete that keyframe out of there. For any of these on the left side, if you see these little drop down menus, you can select specific parameters to view. So right now we're viewing all the transform. We could just say we want to see where the position transform options are. There's no keyframes. They're all darkened because there's something else. So in this case, they're the scale. So if I click on scale, boom, I see my scale parameters there. We have both scale X and Y. That's why there were two on there. So we could adjust just one if we wanted. Okay, so this video animation, when it comes to keyframing, very powerful. Lets you very easily clean keyframes up on the timeline there. All right, so that's what I got for you today. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and the little bell to turn on notifications if you want to be notified next time we go live.